That line landed harder than any winter gust in Denver. It wasn't a mistake, it was a decision. I'd wired $30,000 so my daughter's family could spend Christmas in the UK, and they boarded without me like I was luggage they chose not to check. In that moment, humiliation hardened into something steadier. Record everything, cancel what I paid for, and route the future through ironclad paper. Will, trust, and consequences. This isn't a story about a ruined vacation. It's about a father who stopped financing his own erasure and rebuilt love with boundaries that don't bend. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp and your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments hit home. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Snow rimmed the eaves when I woke, the front range standing blue beyond my kitchen window. I ground beans, let the kettle hiss, and poured a slow circle over the paper cone until the air filled with coffee. The house was quiet in the way a widower's house is quiet. My name is Thomas Garrett, Tom to most people, and at 66 I am retired from a life of calculating loads and margins, asking what weight a beam can take before it splits. The habit shows up in the neat lines of a leather ledger where I track expenses with a fountain pen, in the way I check latches twice, in the rhythm of deliberate tasks. On the mantel sits Evelyn in a black frame, captured 15 years ago at Charing Cross Bookshop, one hand on a stack of paperbacks, the other holding a cup steaming in London damp. Christmas in Britain was her favorite. Brass bands, oranges with clove, lights across narrow streets. This year I meant to carry that glow for our grandchildren, to cross the ocean so they could inherit something warmer than presents, a memory with weight. The itinerary lived in my head like a map. Edinburgh for the market, then a week in London for the tree at Trafalgar Square and carols at St. Martin in the Fields, a day in Bath, a sweep through the Cotswolds. Flights from Denver to Heathrow timed so Lily and Noah could see shop windows before crowds pressed too hard. I transferred $30,000 to my daughter Olivia to bundle everything. She would book the Islington Townhouse LNER tickets, Oyster cards, the studio tour. I kept a separate envelope of cash and tucked it, with passports and confirmations, into the canvas carry-on by the coat rack. Olivia is my only child, practical and quick, often sprinting to catch up. Lily and Noah, 8 and 10, live where wonder meets questions. They made lists about buses, the London Eye, and hot chocolate by the Thames. "Does hot chocolate taste better by the Thames?" Lily asked last week. "Will the London Eye go fast?" Noah wanted to know. I smiled and said, "You'll tell me." There is a history of rescue in our ledger, grad school top-ups that became gifts, an apartment deposit when a landlord wouldn't wait, a car loan that never found its way back. None of it was signed because family, I told myself, does not notarize love. The habit feels noble until it becomes weather, always there, and you forget to ask if it suits anyone. Aisha Patel, an old friend who practices elder law, likes to say, "Boundaries are love wearing armor." I wrote it on an index card and tucked it into my ledger. I hadn't picked it up because Olivia was my daughter, and Christmas is a season for softness. Preparation calmed me. I checked adapters, printed confirmations, confirmed the townhouse key would be in a lockbox near Upper Street. I slid a few of Evelyn's letters into the inside pocket of my wool coat. They were ordinary notes, groceries and weather, but her handwriting steadied me the way rebar steadies concrete. By late afternoon, the snow had deepened. Streetlights pushed halos onto the white, and the neighborhood settled into quiet celebration. Porch lights, garlands, a plastic snowman 2 doors down. Inside, furniture polish and paper, and a trace of lavender marked the air. I opened the ledger and logged the day, stocking stuffer trinkets, a compact guidebook for children, a travel umbrella because London insists. Earlier in the week, I had asked Olivia again about the bookings. "Everything's handled, Dad." "Flights, lodging, trains," she said. "We're going to make memories, Tom," Mark added. I wanted to believe them. "We'll keep it simple," I told myself, setting the ledger down. I could see Lily and Noah at the South Bank, fingers around paper cups, breath rising like ghosts. Giving them London felt like knitting another row into the fabric of us, something that might hold even when I no longer could. A hesitation brushed the edge of my thoughts. I had asked Olivia more than once whether everything, flights, lodging, trains, was in place. She said yes each time. Engineering makes you conservative, so I copied the flight numbers on a note card and tucked it into my wallet. Redundancy is a virtue when failure costs more than pride. Night arrived early. I set the passports, the ledger, and Evelyn's letters on the hall table, aligned like three small promises. The suitcase zipper closed with a final sound. I set the alarm for before dawn when the city is runway lights and breath clouds. I set out the coats and gloves by the door, lined like tools before a job. Before switching off the lamp, I stood with Evelyn's photograph and let the room be silent long enough to hear what I owed the day to come. "Let me carry your joy," I whispered. Then I clicked the light and let the house hold me, ready for the drive to the airport, ready for air that wakes the skin, ready for a departure I believed would begin a season none of us would forget. Denver International greeted me with garlands strung along the concourse and the soft chime of announcements that never quite resolve into words. People rolled past in two determined currents, boots clipping, coats flaring, the hum of holiday travel bright as tin. I felt steady as I joined the line, passport in the inner pocket, confirmations in the carry-on, ledger in the coat. The morning smelled of coffee and luggage rubber, and for a breath or two I believed the day would behave. Olivia met me just shy of the stanchions, cheeks flushed, a knit cap pulled low. She took my sleeve. "Dad, I forgot to buy your ticket." "Go home." The words were plain, like a sign printed in black on white, but they landed with the sensation of stepping off a curb you didn't see. Her eyes slid past mine to the board where LHR blinked in clean letters. I stepped into the light at the counter and gave my name. The agent's hands moved with practiced calm, her screen reflecting in her glasses. "I see a party of 4, she said, tapping. "No Thomas Garrett on this record." She glanced up with a sympathy trained in airports. "The fare class is closed. Alternates would be multi-stop and very costly." I nodded to show I understood the language of systems. Behind me, Mark guided Lily and Noah toward the security line, narrating something cheerful about the big airplane, as if a gentle voice could float above logistics. The posture was unmistakable: drift the problem elsewhere, keep momentum, don't look too closely at the hinge. "I transferred 30,000, I said quietly, placing my phone on the counter with the bank app open to the confirmation. Olivia's mouth shaped gratitude without landing there. "We'll settle the difference over there," she murmured. The phrase clanged against the tidy columns of my ledger. Settle the difference is what you say when you have not done the math. Lily spotted me and waved with both hands, the unalloyed joy of a child who believes every door opens to family. Noah hopped in place, miming a Ferris wheel with his arms. I lifted a hand, swallowed the heat behind my eyes, and aimed an even voice toward them. "Later, we'll have time." They didn't need to know a bridge had shifted under their feet. I asked the agent for options, not because I meant to chase the plane, but because information is the first control. She priced an odd itinerary through Dallas and Reykjavik, numbers stacking in a way that could be paid but shouldn't be. The calculation was more than money. To buy my way after them would be to reward a behavior that wore my name thin. I thanked the agent. She offered me the kind look that belongs to nurses and gate agents, people who hold open doors they can't make you walk through. Olivia's jaw set. "Please go home," she said. "Don't make a scene." The holiday music over the PA ran a little louder just then, sleigh bells covering the smallness of the exchange. I noted the humiliation the way an inspector notes a hairline crack, not for drama, for record. I lifted the handle of my suitcase, felt the familiar grip, and turned away from the rope line. It was not surrender. It was choosing ground. Home had a scanner, a filing drawer, a desk that met square at the corners. Home had timestamps and contracts and the slow patience of due process. The concourse lights receded behind me as I walked toward ground transportation where cold air freshened the edges of my thoughts. The taxi was warm enough that the windows filmed and cleared with each breath. Snow tapped the roof with a soft metronome. I opened the ledger on my lap and wrote a single line in the day's space. Excluded at check-in, investigate. Writing it down converted the morning from injury into intent. The pen left a groove in the paper, a tiny channel where ink settled and would not wash away. Out on Pena Boulevard, the runways lay like long mirrors, and planes lifted as if nothing in the world resists ascent. I watched one wheel up into the thin sun and considered how often designs fail, not at the point of load, but at the connection. Bolts not torqued, rebar not tied, a joint not inspected when it mattered. When I was working job sites, the first rule after a bad sound was simple: stop the pour. You don't throw good concrete after compromised formwork. You brace, you reassess, you add steel where the drawing assumed good faith. The city lay pale and square as we crested toward downtown. I thought of the townhouse in Islington, the LNER tickets, the Oyster cards, how all of it might be unwound with the right calls made in the right order. I thought of my friend Aisha and her index card line about armor. Boundary is not a wall against love. It is the shape that lets love hold. "Rough morning?" the driver asked, catching my eye in the mirror. "A change of plan," I said. It was the only dialogue left in me that felt accurate. The rest belonged to paper and signatures and systems that stamped time with the indifference I needed. Snow thickened as we left the highway and angled toward my neighborhood, each flake a small insistence that the world is permitted to reset. On the porch rails, a layer gathered like foam. In the yard, footprints would have read as any man's, going out bravely, coming back aware. I took out the note card with flight numbers I had copied last night and slid it into the ledger pocket, a modest act of order that steadied my breath. The house received me with its winter hush. I set the suitcase by the hall table, laid the ledger beside the framed photo of Evelyn, and touched the glass the way a man tests a beam, lightly, but with knowledge. The airport and its public brightness already felt like a distant set. The next scene belonged to a desk lamp and a phone and the slow turning gears of consequence. I hung my coat, washed my hands, and let the silence clear the gate noise from my head. Then I pulled a legal pad to the center of the desk and numbered a list I would not yet execute on the page. Review transactions, contact property owner, contact rail, secure accounts, call Aisha. The pencil tip rested at the first line without making a mark. The chapter's work was to set the hook, not to reel. Outside, a plow passed with a hollow rush. Inside, a widower's house held its breath and waited for the investigation a careful man would begin. The house received me like a clean, empty sight at dawn. I hung my coat, set the suitcase by the hall table, and clicked on the brass desk lamp that throws a circle of steady light. Corners met at true right angles. Labels faced outward on the metal file rack. The heater murmured a measured rhythm. Order pushed back against the noise that still rang from the airport. I opened the leather ledger, dated the page, and wrote a title across the top in block letters. Trip, UK Remediation. The laptop came up with its familiar chime. I squared a legal pad beside the keyboard, set my fountain pen parallel to its left edge, and pulled the chair tight to the desk so my ribs touched wood. The ritual mattered. It told me I was not lost. One by one, I signed into accounts, checking, savings, credit cards, travel wallets. I matched ledger lines to the bank's digital trails, highlighting each charge that traced back to the $30,000 I had wired to Olivia. The numbers were tidy on the screen, but the sweep of them, lodging, rail, tours, drew a shape that no longer resembled a family trip. It resembled a structure leaning. The Islington townhouse sat at the top of my list. I found the tenancy email chain, read the contract twice, and located the clause that allowed cancellation for a penalty of £2,000. I drafted a note with the precision of a field report. Cancel effective immediately. Include a time-stamped confirmation. Record that the cancel action was initiated by me, not the booking agent. I hit send, then created a folder called UK Cancellations, Evidence, and set it to receive everything that followed. Rail next. The LNER portal clicked open after I guessed which of Olivia's reference numbers aligned with our dates. Where policy allowed, I converted tickets to credit rather than throwing value away. For the Cotswolds tour, I read the terms line by line and submitted a cancellation that should trigger the 60% refund. Each receipt I saved as a PDF with the date in the file name, then printed a hard copy and clipped it to a cover sheet noting policy citations. The stack began to acquire weight. As I worked, the phone rattled across the desk with calls and texts. I did not pick up. I wrote in the legal pad instead. 12:41 p.m. Olivia, why are you canceling? 12:44, Mark. Kids upset. 12:50, Olivia. We can fix later. The act of logging cooled everything. Each ring entered the record as a scrap of data, not an argument I could lose. A man can drown in words or he can turn them into ink. I signed into the airline loyalty account that still bore Evelyn's initials. The page loaded a history I had not expected, 140,000 miles transferred out over the last 6 weeks to a family pool managed by Olivia. I captured screenshots, exported the CSV, and marked the dates with a fluorescent line. The miles were not money, but they were value, and more than that, they were the story of flights taken with a woman who had loved winter cities. Security, then. I opened the password manager and generated new strings for the bank and email, switched two-factor authentication from text to an app, printed backup codes, and sealed them in an envelope I signed across the flap. I filed requests with the credit bureaus to freeze my file and noted confirmation numbers in the ledger, copying them again into the legal pad because redundancy in crisis is not extravagance. In profile pages where Olivia was listed as an authorized contact, I removed her name and saved the changes. The screen asked if I was sure. I clicked yes without pausing, then wrote the time. When the kettle hissed, I stood, poured black tea, and straightened the frame of Evelyn's photograph with the side of my palm. Steam rose in a ribbon I could follow with my breath. Engineers are not immune to hurt, but we are trained to keep a hand on the instrument panel while the cabin shakes. I called Aisha. I gave her the chronology clean, like a checklist read into a recorder. Exclusion at check-in, cancellations initiated with timestamps, loyalty miles, transfers, running log of calls. She listened and then said what I knew she would say. Bring everything. We'll set trusts and a new will, record capacity, and draft letters to stop misuse. We set an early appointment for morning. An email landed while we were still on the line, a checklist with boxes I could begin to tick. Trust revision, will update, video capacity, cease and desist, bank fraud liaison. I dialed the bank's fraud line and waded through the music that pretends to be sympathetic. When a human answered, I laid out the case and asked for a supervisor. I requested a watch on my profiles, a case number tied to the trip budget, and a verification protocol requiring a phrase known only to me before any credit action could post. We can add a note, the supervisor said. Do it, I said, and please give me the recording reference. I wrote the agent's name, the time, and the code in the margin of the legal pad and drew a box around them. Email confirmations began to arrive. Islington, cancellation processed with a glossy PDF and a server timestamp in UTC LNER. Credit issued to the original method. Cotswolds, partial refund per clause and paragraph. I printed them, stamped the top page with the date and mountain time equivalent, and slid each packet into the evidence folder. The stack had become a story told in receipts. Back to the ledger, I summarized recoveries and outstanding amounts in the same tidy hand I had used for birthday budgets and plumbing repairs, then wrote a single sentence beneath the totals and drew a line under it. Do not finance what disrespects the foundation. Night pressed its knuckles against the windows. The heater cycled a soft exhale. I stood in the doorway and let the room resolve into its quiet geometry. Facts first, counsel next, concrete does not pour itself. I switched off the desk lamp, meaning to leave the rest for morning. The phone buzzed one last time. A bank supervisor, her voice measured, reported that a request to increase my credit limit had been submitted from an IP at Heathrow within the past hour. The e-signature failed to match. "We flagged it," she said. "Do you authorize a formal investigation?" "I do," I answered. "Link it to the case number and email me the incident log." When the message arrived, I forwarded it to Aisha's secure inbox and printed a copy for the folder. Before bed, I laid out a stack for morning: cancellations, screenshots of miles, call log, bank case printout, checklist. I buckled the ledger's strap. The click sounded like a sight gate locking after hours, forms braced, pour halted, crews sent home until we could add steel to what had been trusted without proof. Aisha's lobby held winter light in its marble the way a pond holds sky. I arrived with the stack from my desk, cancellation PDFs clipped by time zone, screenshots of loyalty miles marked in fluorescent ink, a call log with neat timestamps, the bank case printout. The receptionist poured water, the glass sweating briefly before it learned the room's temperature. When Aisha opened her door, I felt the same small exhale I used to feel when a crane operator signaled steady. We were about to move something heavy with care. I gave the chronology once, the way an engineer reads a checklist into a recorder. She did not interrupt. Her pencil hovered over a yellow legal pad and then began to shape the frame we needed. There would be a trust, and there would be a new will. Olivia would not be a beneficiary. The major assets would flow into what she named, without sentiment, the Evelyn Garrett Education Trust, designed to fund local STEM and music programs. A no-contest clause would close the door to opportunistic litigation. We would schedule a physician to sit for a video-recorded capacity session so that any future claim about my cognition would find a dated, witnessed answer. Her manner was clinical, not cold, the tone you want when the structure you live in needs reinforcement quickly. On identity protection, we moved from theory to tools. A cease and desist template would address misuse of my name, specifically the attempted credit limit increase submitted from Heathrow with a forged e-signature. Aisha asked for the incident numbers and logged them in her case management system, then requested my authorization to liaise directly with the bank's fraud unit. I signed the authorization and slid it back across the desk. We confirmed my credit freezes, changed my account passphrase to a nonsense string I could still speak under pressure, and removed any instance of Olivia as an authorized contact. Each action ended with a confirmation number and a note to preserve the email headers intact. Evidence hygiene came next, and I appreciated that she cared about the small hinges on which big doors swing. Server stamps would stay in UTC on the PDFs. I would continue to note mountain time equivalents on paper covers without altering the files. Phone logs would remain as scans with date, time, and summary. Audio files would be saved in a folder whose name included the date in ISO format. She invited me to upload all artifacts daily into a secure shared drive. I agreed and wrote a second list in my ledger because ink on paper keeps me honest. We set a communication posture. I would not argue by phone or text. Any necessary message to Olivia or Mark would be brief, factual, and archivable. Emotional labor would not appear in the record. Facts would carry the case. Aisha asked me to draft a boundary statement while she reached the bank supervisor by phone. I wrote slowly, avoiding flourishes. Funds originating from me were frozen or withdrawn. Vendor communications tied to those funds would come from me or from counsel. No further assistance would be extended pending review. All future contact on financial matters would be in writing. When the bank supervisor joined us on speaker, Aisha summarized the Heathrow IP event and cited the existing case number. We requested that no credit actions post without live voice confirmation from me and the passphrase. The supervisor read back what he entered: a hard lock on unilateral changes, an alert to escalate any unusual request, a note that my counsel was authorized to receive copies of incident logs. I wrote the reference string in the ledger and boxed it in red. We refined the boundary message and then sent it to the shared family address at a scheduled hour. The subject line was plain. The body contained only those sentences we had vetted. Before I reached the sidewalk, my phone lit with an incoming call from London. I stepped back into Aisha's office and placed the device on her conference table. I announced that I would be recording, which Colorado law requires when you intend to record your own call and notify the other party. Olivia appeared on my screen in a narrow kitchen with unfamiliar tiles. She said I was ruining Christmas. Mark stepped into frame long enough to contribute a line about revisiting my power of attorney when you're calmer. I wrote the phrase on my pad and underlined it twice. I read the boundary message once, verbatim, and ended the call. The file saved to storage with a timestamp down to the second. Back home, the house met me with quiet that felt less like emptiness and more like a resource. I brewed tea, used the side of my hand to square Evelyn's photo, and let the steam wash a dull ache that had set into my chest after the call. Grief wants to knock you off your feet. Procedure asks you to turn grief into a task list so your hands have work while your heart thinks. I chose the list. Aisha's email arrived in a sweep. Trust framework outline. Will language that named the exclusion without malice? A no-contest clause with the kind of bite that deters bad advice. A calendar invite for the capacity session with my physician. A witness schedule for early next week. I printed the drafts, initialed the receipt page of each, and slid them beneath a brass clip I labeled execution packet. The phrase felt like a gear that finally found its tooth. Fraud confirmations followed from the bank and the credit bureaus. The investigation had been escalated. A lock on unilateral credit actions was active. Freeze acknowledgments included confirmation codes I wrote in the ledger and stapled to the day's log. The evidence binder took on a density that reassured me, weight distributed to proper peers. Olivia's reply to the boundary email arrived near dusk, a thicket of accusation and heat without a single new fact. I archived it without response and added one clean line to the log. Snow began again, finer than in the morning, so that the porch light made it look like metal dust in a shop. When Aisha called once more, it was only to say she would run a protective sweep overnight on public record and form sites. She wanted to see if a guardianship packet had been drafted in my name anywhere it shouldn't be. It was a precaution, not a prediction, and I thanked her for adding steel where the drawings of my family had assumed good faith. I stacked tomorrow's folder, drafts to review, the capacity appointment slip, the witness timetable, a fresh legal pad. The lamp switched off with its familiar click. The plan was no longer argument. The plan was execution, signing, notarizing, recording, so that the structure I lived in could take the load I knew was coming. The camera's red dot glowed steady on the tripod, a small, unwavering pupil. Aisha set a slate on the conference table, date, time, my name, and asked me to begin. I stated my full name, my address, today's date, the city, and the governor's name. My primary care physician sat opposite with a nurse, hands folded, voice even. We moved through memory and judgment prompts, recall 3 words after a delay, count backward by 7s, interpret a proverb, explain how I would handle a neighbor's leaking pipe at midnight. I felt the old muscles of sight work engage, sequence, clarity, no flourish. The recording was not for theater. It was a future answer to an argument that had not yet arrived. 2 neutral witnesses took their places, one a paralegal, the other the building's office manager. The notary's journal lay open in neat columns, a stamp poised like a tool at the edge of the frame. HVAC breathed through the vents. Somewhere down the hall an elevator chimed. Aisha explained the choreography once. Initial every page, sign where flagged, wait for the notary, let the camera see each movement, no one prompt the testator. The language of care and the language of law overlapped until they became one set of instructions. Before we touched a pen, Aisha summarized the architecture. A new will, cleanly drafted, would exclude Olivia and document the reasons, patterns of financial exploitation, identity misuse attempts, coercive threats. A trust would be established in Evelyn's name to fund STEM and music in Colorado schools. A no-contest clause with fee shifting would meet frivolous challenges at the door and charge admission. Successor trustee and executor designations would smooth any handoff. I listened and measured the load path. The design carried. For the record, Aisha read aloud the paragraphs that closed the door. The exclusion clause first, then the no contest language. Hearing the words spoke a finality that ink alone cannot carry. She asked if anything felt unclear. It did not. I affirmed intent without decoration. She nodded to the notary. We executed. I signed the will, the trust declaration, a self-proving affidavit, ancillary certificates. The witnesses followed, then the notary pressed seals with an audible clack that landed like a latch. The camera caught our hands, the papers, the rhythm of formalities that make private decisions public to the extent they need to be. Aisha slid the originals into a fire-resistant envelope, marked the label in black letters, and set it aside for vaulting. Certified copies went into my client binder with a blue spine. We aligned assets, which is a phrase that sounds simple and is anything but. Transfer on death designations were updated. Retirement accounts received new beneficiaries consistent with the trust. Brokerage accounts were retitled in the trust's name. Aisha read each instruction twice. I initialed a checklist to prevent any so-called forgotten asset from slipping loose later and inviting mischief. I signed a letter to the bank concerning the safe deposit box. She clipped it to a courier pouch. On speaker, the fraud supervisor at my bank confirmed what my ledger had already understood. The Heathrow origin request to increase my credit limit had been escalated into a formal investigation attached to my case file. Any new credit activity would trigger manual review requiring the passphrase we set. Reference numbers and agent IDs were read aloud. I wrote them down, drew a box around them, and slid the paper into the evidence binder's front sleeve. Digital hygiene followed. Aisha's team created an archive mailbox that would auto-collect any financial request arriving from Olivia or Mark. Alerts were set to ping the firm whenever an email with certain keywords hit my inbox. My accounts would flag transfers above a modest threshold. Redundancy, which had been a habit born of caution, graduated into policy. Aisha invited me to make a brief personal statement on camera. I kept it measured. I said that the changes reflected stewardship and dignity, not anger, that I wanted my grandchildren to be protected indirectly, through schools and instruments and scholarships, rather than captured inside a parent's poor decisions. That justice was not revenge. The words felt like tightening bolts on a flange until the gasket seated and the seam stopped weeping. In the hallway, I let my palm rest on the window's cool glass and watched winter sun stripe the parking deck. I pictured Evelyn outside the Charing Cross bookshop, cup steaming, a smile caught by a street photographer who never knew what he had given us. Love and boundary are not opposites. They are the same beam looked at from the side and from the end. Chain of custody mattered. Aisha sealed the originals in a numbered vault bag. We signed the receipt. A courier would carry it down to the firm's safe. A second set of certified copies slid into a rigid envelope I would place in my home safe that night. The bag's zipper drawstring clicked through a plastic lock. The sound belonged to a door that closes right. We huddled briefly on strategy. If escalation came, certified notices were ready. We would not debate by phone. Public delivery with witnesses could be arranged to end ambiguity. Aisha said she had one more sweep to report and left the room. She returned with a laptop and a stillness I have learned to trust in professionals. Cached metadata from a popular legal form service showed that a guardianship and financial conservatorship packet had been assembled 10 days before the trip. The draft named me as incapacitated and requested control over my assets. The cloud folder belonged to Mark's account. Screenshots were taken, server logs preserved, timestamps intact. The discovery did not surprise me. It placed a name on a design that was never about a vacation. We added the printouts to the binder behind the Capacity Video Index tab. Aisha drafted a rebuttal affidavit that referenced today's evaluation and laid out in calm paragraphs why any petition would be frivolous on its face. She prepared a notice to opposing counsel if they filed that fee motions would follow. I initialed where required. The air in the room grew thin, not from panic, but from clarity. At day's end, Aisha proposed the delivery I had imagined in the quiet of my house. A controlled public handoff of certified copies when they returned through Denver arrivals. Facts, documents, witnesses, nothing more dramatic than paper moving from one hand to another in a place where announcements hum and strangers pass. I agreed. I carried the binder under my arm to the elevator and stepped into evening sharp enough to hold an edge. The next chapter would not be argument, it would be execution in the open. I carried the blue-spined iron binder out of Aisha's office the way a foreman carries a set of final plans, tight to the ribs, edges flush, decisions already poured in ink. The evening air had that knife-clean quality Denver saves for clear winter days, and I let it scrape the inside of my lungs until thoughts sorted themselves by weight. The guardianship draft did not surprise me. It simply named the shape I had refused to admit. I tested my motives the way I once tested a beam. Dignity first, then stewardship, then what deflected least under load. If there was anger, it belonged to an earlier draft of me. What remained was resolution. At a red light, I texted Aisha a single sentence. Proceed with controlled delivery at arrivals. Her reply stacked in 2 dots and then 3. Confirmed. I'll handle logistics. I put the phone face down and drove the rest in silence, measuring the distance between reactivity and the ethics I wanted Lily and Noah to remember. The airport is a public room with cameras and witnesses and rules that dwarf personal drama. A handoff there would minimize theater and kill ambiguity. That was the point. Back at my desk, I drew a grid on a yellow sheet, essentials on the left, protocol on the right. Essentials, certified copies of the will, the trust, the no contest clause, the capacity video index, the bank fraud case printout, the Heathrow IP incident log, a slim legal pad, ID, reading glasses, the phone charged and set to battery saver. Protocol, greet the grandchildren first. State purpose once in a neutral voice. The documents pass from Aisha's hand, not mine. No argument, no improv. Exit on schedule, whether words have finished or not. I wrote the schedule in block letters, 10 minutes, full stop. Aisha called to report she had secured a bank fraud supervisor to attend as an independent witness in case a verbal confirmation became necessary, and a paralegal to log time and location. She was tracking their flight, LHR to DEN, with a buffer for customs. We chose a meet point under arrival's door 612A 10 minutes after wheels down. If we need to end contact, she said, touch the binder spine with 2 fingers. I said understood. Then I wrote the gesture on my grid because stress erases the obvious. I sat to script a 90-second statement. The words had to carry without barbs. I wrote, I am here to welcome you home and to deliver documents that clarify my estate and boundaries. Funds originating from me are discontinued. Fraud matters are with the bank. The charitable trust replaces inheritance. I timed it with a second hand and shaved where excess syllables gathered. The cadence had to hold if emotion tried to break through. Safeguards came next. We plotted 2 exits, primary through short-term parking with Aisha at my shoulder, secondary through the taxi level if crowds clogged the first. I set a screen record shortcut on the phone in case an officer or a loud voice introduced confusion. I printed a 1-page sheet with case numbers and the passphrase encoded in a way only I would recognize. It slid into the inside pocket with the same quiet as a tool returning to its drawer. That night, I addressed 2 envelopes in my neatest hand. For Lily, for Noah. I kept their notes out of the legal packet, separate and unentangled with adult scaffolding. Each letter made a promise I could keep, a weekend walk among the downtown lights, cocoa that steams in the cold, a story about their grandmother in London told without bitterness. I wrote that sometimes grown-ups choose hard paths to keep families safe. I signed with Granddad because that is how they name me when they are sleepy. In the morning, I met our pastor for 30 minutes in the small office off the nave. I told him the shape of things without insisting on blame. He said, forgiveness is not opening the safe. It's not opening a wound. The sentence fit into my pocket next to the grid. I asked him to pray for steadiness, not victory. He did briefly in plain words. Leaving, I understood that the point was not to win a performance, but to refuse one. Domestic order steadied me further. I laundered the gray sweater, polished the shoes until they remembered how to shine, refilled the tea canister, aligned the pins parallel to the desk edge. I squared Evelyn's photo and told her the plan without speaking loudly enough to disturb air. The motions replaced a rising current under my ribs with a hum I could work beside. When final emails from the bank arrived confirming the hard lock on unilateral credit moves, I printed them and clipped them to the fraud section's front. The binder now carried an index: will, trust, capacity, fraud, guardianship draft, notices. Tabs marched like joists. I reset devices to do not disturb, whitelisting Aisha and the bank supervisor. Anything from Olivia or Mark routed by rule to an archived mailbox no one would answer from. On the log I wrote, "No arguments in public, no explanations beyond script." Then I walked the driveway to the corner and back while reading the statement under my breath, hands relaxed, breath low. Once my voice climbed on the phrase, "Charitable trust replaces inheritance." I pressed it down to level. The words were not an indictment, they were a boundary line painted straight. Packing the day of kit felt like laying out a small, exact toolkit. Certified copies in order, 2 pens that start even in cold, ID, glasses, the children's envelopes in a side sleeve where I could reach them without opening the binder. Into my inside pocket went the card with the coded passphrase and the case numbers. I placed the blue-spined binder by the door with my coat, set the house alarm schedule, and sat for one more check. If Lily or Noah ever see this on a security camera, I asked the empty room, will they see a man choosing care over theater? The room did not answer, but the question shaved another edge off a sentence I had written too sharply. I crossed it out and wrote a cleaner line. The point was clarity. Catharsis belonged elsewhere. Morning of the plan, I emailed Aisha. Confirmed. I will stand back until you cue. Her reply came with a map pin, the 10-minute window, and a simple closer. Facts. Documents. Witnesses. I locked the door behind me, the binder under my arm, the air bright enough to sting. The choice had been made already, but choices require rehearsal. I walked to the car and practiced touching the binder spine with 2 fingers. It looked like nothing. That was the design. International arrivals breathed its own weather every time the doors sighed open. Cold riding in on the draft, warm air spilling out with the tired sweetness of duty-free shops. Aisha and I stood beneath the silver numerals for door 612A, the bank fraud supervisor beside us in a charcoal suit, her paralegal holding a narrow clipboard and a pen that clicked once, then went still. I set the blue-spined binder on the suitcase handle to check the tabs with my thumb. Will, trust, capacity, fraud, guardianship draft, notices. Then closed it and rested both hands lightly across the cover. We had agreed on 10 minutes. The flight tracker on Aisha's phone drew a straight line from London to now. The first wave of travelers came loose from the sliding doors with the usual airport choreography, strollers in instrument cases, and coats tied at the waist. When Lily saw me, her expression lit like a string of bulbs plugged in all at once. She ran. Noah followed, shorter steps churning hard, a plastic bag bumping his knee. I knelt into their momentum and the scene shrank to peppermint on Lily's scarf, the faint tang of airplane air in Noah's hair, the small weights of their arms pressing certainty into my shoulders. They did not ask why I was here with a binder and not at a Christmas market across an ocean. They told me about a toy shop and a window of mechanical bears. I matched their energy for a handful of seconds, then stood because the next part required a standing voice. Olivia and Mark came into view like a temperature shift. They were still technically in a vacation posture, soft clothes, souvenir bags, but their faces recalibrated when they noticed Aisha's portfolio and the bank supervisor's badge clipped to her lapel. Mark's shoulders rose. Olivia's hand moved to the strap of her bag as if that strap might steady what was arriving. Aisha took a half step forward, not to intercept, but to make the process visible. I delivered the words I had practiced until they fit the size of my breath. I'm here to welcome you home and to deliver documents that clarify my estate and boundaries. The sentences walk their measured path. Support for me is discontinued. Fraud matters are with the bank. The charitable trust replaces inheritance. No barbs, no expansion. The point of a boundary is its straightness. Per protocol, Aisha, not I, handed the certified copies to Olivia, the will first, with the exclusion and reasons. Then the trust declaration naming the Evelyn Garrett Education Trust for STEM and Music in Colorado schools. The no contest clause, the capacity video index, the paralegal marked the time and location with a clean wrist. I kept my palms on the binder so there could be no argument about hands or gestures. The bank supervisor stood neutrally to one side, eyes on the air between people rather than the people themselves. Mark reached for volume. "This is insane," he said, voice pointed enough to turn heads. "You're humiliating us." Olivia's words braided immediately around his. "You're cutting the family off." I did not step into the syllables. Aisha spoke instead, tone tuned for concourses. "All financial communications must be in writing," she said. "This is not a venue for discussion." The reminder was less for them than for the room. Process over theater. Lily looked up at me because that is what children do when sound becomes angular. "Why are voices sharp?" she asked. I lowered to her height. "Sometimes grown-ups make hard choices to keep families safe," I said. "We'll still see the holiday lights this weekend." It was the only promise I could make that did not mortgage truth. Noah held the plastic bag tighter but softened around the eyes. The bank supervisor offered, without accusation, a concise status. The Heathrow Origin credit limit request is an active investigation. Any future credit activity on my accounts requires manual review and a passphrase. She cited the case number, nothing more. The words hung like a posted sign. People can ignore signs. They cannot claim later that the sign was not there. I touched the binder spine with 2 fingers, the cue Aisha and I had agreed would end contact. She closed the sequence smoothly, offering Olivia a printed card with her firm's intake address and a brief closer about written correspondence. We pivoted toward short-term parking. Before we reached the elevator, 2 airport police officers approached Mark. They were quiet and direct, badges visible, hands low. Because of the active identity fraud report, they asked for a brief interview in a nearby office to document his side. It was not an arrest, no cuffs, no raised voices. The paralegal noted the time and the door number of the office. Aisha and I did not participate. The process had its own lanes, and we were out of them now. Saul arrived at the edge of the scene, a retired accountant's posture, a man who can read a ledger just by watching faces. He looked from the documents to the officers to Mark, then to Olivia. He did not lecture. He said quietly to his son-in-law, "Remain silent until you've spoken to counsel." The sentence shifted the room a degree. It was the first adult voice in their orbit that did not try to find an angle, only a footing. We took exit plan A through short-term parking as designed. The walk was unremarkable. Terrazzo, elevator, the brief hush of enclosed air, then the taste of outside cold. In the car, Aisha ran the quick checklist. Paralegal log captured, bank supervisor present, no physical contact, no raised voices from us. I texted myself a single-line memo for the record. Delivery completed, no debate, police interview of Mark initiated. When the doors shut and the heat lifted, adrenaline receded to something human. The hug with Lily and Noah replayed with the clarity of a bell that rings once, exactly as struck. Grief was in it. Of course it was. But what held underneath was relief. The structure had taken the load. A line had been painted straight. Tires would cross it or not, but no one could pretend the line wasn't there. At home, I filed the day's materials, the paralegal's timesheet, the bank supervisor's card, my memo. I slid them beneath the fraud tab so the binder's story would remain chronological. I brewed tea and squared Evelyn's photograph. The house breathed the quiet of a site secured after hours, machinery parked, forms braced, pour halted until morning. On a fresh sheet, I wrote a new header, post handoff, repair and next steps, and made a list that began with the only 2 items I could control tonight. Call the charities, keep the weekend promise. Then I set the pen down and stayed in the chair until the heat of the mug reached my hands and held. Back home, the house absorbed what the airport had shaken loose. I set the blue spine-bound binder on the desk and stood still long enough to feel the quiet settle into my ribs. The kettle clicked on, steam climbed in a clean ribbon, and the scent of black tea replaced the metallic tang of terminal air. Repair begins with small, repeatable motions. I titled a fresh page on the legal pad, post-handoff, repair and next steps, and made a first list. Notify the partner programs, fix the communications posture, check in with the pastor, keep the 90-day rule, watch the fraud case to its end. Hunger arrived late and matter-of-fact. I diced onions, celery, and carrots, the knife keeping time against the board. A chicken breast went into a pot with thyme and a bay leaf. The room filled with the kind of warmth that doesn't ask for an audience. While the stock took color, I filed the airport materials in chronological order beneath the fraud tab and slid my one-line memo behind them. Process restores a person to himself. When the soup simmered quietly, I opened email and drafted 2 notes to the world I wanted to build. The first went to the local school district's STEM coordinator, introducing the Evelyn Garrett Education Trust and a modest first grant for lab kits in middle school science rooms. The second to the community music program that maintains a battered fleet of violins, asking for intake forms so the trust could underwrite new strings, repairs, and a few sturdy cases. I kept the tone practical. Money is a tool. A tool deserves a plan. I called the pastor for 10 minutes of moral inventory. He listened to the shape of the airport scene and repeated a line he'd given me before. Forgiveness is not opening the safe. It's not opening a wound. The sentence fit the day like a brace. I scheduled a quick in-person check-in for the end of the week and hung up knowing I had chosen boundary, not spectacle. The next message belonged to Lily and Noah. On the family account, I sent a photo I'd taken of downtown lights years ago, strings of white reflected in a puddle near Union Station, and proposed Saturday 6:30 for cocoa and a short walk. I added one sentence a child could carry without strain. Sometimes grown-ups make hard choices to keep families safe. No blame, no exposition. Children should not haul our scaffolding. Olivia's email arrived a few minutes later, a tangle of apology and grievance braided too tightly to untwist. Just trying to save Christmas, it said in one line, with 3 more about humiliation. I kept my reply to 2 sentences. Receipt acknowledged. All financial matters must be in writing to counsel. Then I archived the thread and logged the exchange with the timestamp. The rule held. Bank messages stacked as the soup finished. The first confirmed the fraud escalation remained active and that any unilateral credit attempt would trigger manual review and my passphrase. I printed the notice, wrote the reference string in the ledger, and stapled it to today's log. Another email followed, a formal note that Mark had accepted responsibility for the account actions tied to the Heathrow request. The bank marked the case resolved with controls intact. I added the closure letter to the binder and wrote 3 words beneath it, security posture maintained because naming the state makes it real. I placed a sticky at the edge of my monitor where my eye could not miss it. 90 days, no loans, no gifts, no exceptions. Email filters remained in force. Any outreach for money routed to archive or legal automatically. Boundaries live best where they can't be bargained in the moment. After dinner, I drove to Red Rocks. Snow ticked under my boots along the terraces, and the amphitheater sat in that winter hush that makes a person hear what is inside his own head. Cold found the hinges of my fingers and made me pay attention to breath. Anger thinned the longer I walked, traded for a steadiness that felt like a footing tested and kept. I looked at the layered rock and thought about time refusing to hurry. Then I turned back before dark had a chance to complicate things. A reply from Aisha waited on my return. The trust paperwork was in final formatting, and she asked me to choose a launch date for the first grants. I wrote February 15th, Evelyn's birthday, on the pad and in an email, then put calendar holds with the STEM coordinator and the music program so we could align criteria. Part of stewardship is remembering that money is only a bridge. People still have to cross it. Administrative hygiene finished the evening. I confirmed beneficiary changes on account dashboards and enabled alerts for any transfer above a conservative threshold. I scanned the evidence binder to an encrypted drive, then placed certified copies into the home safe, closing the door with the slow turn a safe demands. Systems should outlast moods. At dusk, I lit a small candle beside Evelyn's photograph and set the draft announcement for the trust beneath the frame. I didn't speak. The flame did what it always does, converted fuel to light and reminded me that good design obeys simple rules. When the candle guttered low, I snuffed it and wrote 2 agenda lines for the week. Finalize grant criteria, take Lily and Noah to lights. The second line steadied me more than the first. Repair must touch the hand that holds yours. I read back the post-handoff list and checked the boxes I could. Charities contacted, communications posture enforced, pastoral appointment set, fraud case resolved with controls, 90-day rule written where my future self will have to see it. The remaining boxes would wait for morning. I closed the binder and laid my palm flat on its cover long enough to feel the cool through the leather. The house exhaled. The night held. A man can rebuild a life with tea, soup, paper, and a promise kept on a Saturday. It is slow work. It is good work. Chapter 9. Outcome. January settled in with the kind of cold that turns sidewalks into instruments, each bootstep a muted note. Filing confirmations arrived one by one, clean PDFs that clicked into the binder behind the trust tab. With each confirmation, the posture of the house changed. Defense had been the work, now it was construction. I signed the inaugural grant letters for the Evelyn Garrett Education Trust. Amounts modest by the standards of capital campaigns, generous by the standards of classrooms and rehearsal rooms. The language was spare, funds designated for middle school lab kits and for repairs and cases at the community music program. Aisha's paralegal sent the courier receipts. I logged disbursement schedules the way I used to log poor times. Start, finish, cure. The STEM coordinator replied within a day. She listed what teachers had requested: microscopes that held focus, pH meters that didn't drift, a rolling cart for a traveling set of sensors, an afternoon stipend so a pair of teachers could train others without losing income. The music director sent photos of cracked violin cases lined up like casualties, each tagged with masking tape and a child's name. I printed the images and slipped them into a plastic sleeve behind a cover page labeled Instruments Q1. It felt right to insist on simple reporting metrics, dollars to tools, tools to hands, hands to work, because clarity is a kind of respect. An email from Olivia asked for a coffee meeting at a neutral spot. I chose a weekday morning, a cafe with wide windows and a line that never lets anyone talk too long. I replied with conditions that made the conversation possible. 30 minutes, no financial requests, counsel unnecessary if we kept to those lines. The morning arrived gray. I took a table near the door. She arrived with a careful smile and 2 coats of mascara. The apology came in waves: concern about me aging alone, the pressure of holidays, the humiliation of the airport. I kept my palms around the cup so my hands would not try to fix what was not mine. I stated 3 points, nothing more. Respect outranks control. Help is not guardianship. The trust replaces inheritance for reasons already delivered in writing. She looked at the window for a long moment. I hear you, she said. It was not a solution. It was a hinge. Mark was not there. Offstage, his hours belonged to counsel and to whatever a man does when paper and process make theater impossible. At home, the bank's closure letter sat in the fraud section, the line about controls intact highlighted in yellow. I did not bring it to the cafe, did not wave it like a flag. Accountability has its own clock and does not need a town crier. I offered a bridge narrow enough to bear weight. Family therapy if she wanted it, contingent on 3 written conditions: no loans, no gifts, no lies, and a commitment to keep finances separate. I added that I would show up for conversations, not underwriting. She nodded once and asked for a list of possible therapists. I promised to send names, and did later that afternoon, with a single sentence reminding her of the conditions. The email was brief enough to survive rereading. Paperwork resumed its quiet cadence. Back home, I moved the remaining assets into the trust as planned, checking dashboards until the beneficiary screens matched the binder's index. Healthcare proxies were updated to name Aisha First Call. Transfer on death designations refreshed. 2 documents that had evaded notarization came back stamped and initialed. Certified copies went to the safe. Scans went to the encrypted archive. The binder absorbed cover pages and tabs until the story of the last months could be read front to back without a missing line. The house regained a stillness that felt earned rather than empty. I cleaned closets with a measured hand, donating what was extra and keeping the handful of things Evelyn would have picked herself. Space reappeared where clutter had pretended to be memory. The kitchen counters held only a bowl, a kettle, a folded cloth. My shoulder muscles lowered a fraction I hadn't noticed they carried. Saturday brought the delayed promise. I took Lily and Noah downtown after dark to see the lights, Sinatra on the stereo like a benediction from a different era. We walked slow past storefronts and street musicians, cocoa warm against our gloves. I told them a London story about their grandmother buying a book she didn't need because the ink smelled good, a story with no sharp edges and no villains. They laughed at the part where the bookseller wrapped the paperback in brown paper and string, as if paper needed more paper to be safe. On the drive back, they fell quiet in that contented way children do when novelty has reached saturation. At drop-off, I handed them to their mother with no extra envelopes, no just in case. Love rode in the back seat like a third grandchild. Money had a new job elsewhere. The trust's launch date fixed itself on the calendar, February 15th, Evelyn's birthday. Logistics were simple by design. In a school lab, a teacher would unpack kits and let a pair of 7th graders show how a sensor graph tells a story. In a rehearsal room, a row of new cases would lean against the wall, latches working on the first try. I wrote the remarks in a paragraph that named gratitude without apology and promised nothing the trust could not deliver. Neighborhood rhythms returned me to scale. I walked at dawn on streets the city salted into dull safety, bought groceries with a list, borrowed a neighbor's snowblower, and returned it full of gas. The ledger entries thinned to ordinary integers. The drama that had filled a month shrank to fit in a binder and in a man's chest where steady breath makes room for other things. Olivia's next email was short and adult. She confirmed therapy dates and acknowledged my conditions without redefining them. It wasn't reconciliation so much as alignment sufficient to begin. I noted it in the log and put the pen down without ceremony. Relief came like a change in weather you only notice when your coat feels wrong. Writing found me in the evenings, the habit of a craftsman with no job site. I sketched chapters of a small memoir, pouring concrete in snow, not for sale, not even for family, just to keep my hands honest about how structures stand when weather changes. The act steadied the day. That night I stood by the mantel with the trust letters filed and the house warm. The ledger lay open to a page that held fewer entries than most. I wrote a line that had waited to be true. Christmas cost $30,000. Dignity returned at full value. Then I turned off the lamp and let the room darken at the rate it needed. A finish coat laid smooth over a frame built to spec. Late, with the furnace humming a steady baritone, I stood by the mantel and let the house show me its finished lines. The trust letters were filed, the binder's spine square, and the photograph of Evelyn held the room the way a keystone holds an arch. Quietly, by design. There was no music for triumph here, only the small completion of things that now fit. A story doesn't need a cymbal crash to end, it needs a room where the tools are put away and the lights go out in the right order. I learned finally that kindness without armor becomes extraction. For years I mistook open hands for open doors, and then wondered why drafts chilled the house. Aisha's sentence, "Boundaries are love-wearing armor," lived on an index card inside my ledger long before I wore it. Now I do. Armor is not a threat, it is a spec. If a load arrives, the beam does not apologize for existing. It carries what it's rated to and says no to heat arrest. Money found its proper job. It stopped being a leash and became a tool with measurements. A tool needs a plan and a place. The trust is that place. Lab kits in a classroom that smells faintly of disinfectant and hope. Instrument cases that close on the first try. A stipend so a teacher can learn something new without losing a shift. I do not have to perform generosity to feel it. The receipts, the photos, the smiles that arrive in emails, those are enough. They are better than enough because they do not tempt anyone to reach for my pockets when they should be reaching for their own tools. Justice, not revenge, I said on camera, and I meant it. I chose procedures that teach consequences without drawing blood for show. A no-contest clause that does its work in quiet. A capacity video that answers a question before it can be asked in bad faith. Freezes and passphrases that turn risk into admin. I did not slam a door. I installed hinges and locks that work. Pain existed, of course. Pain is not a plan. The plan is paper and signatures and a posture. Facts first, counsel next. Grandparenting learned clean lines too. Lily and Noah know cocoa and lights and stories that do not need villains to be worth telling. They know that when I promise Saturday, Saturday happens. In a drawer, I keep their letters from me, simple, dated, a compass I can hand them later if memory needs help. I do not buy their silence with cash or try to outrun the adult weather with treats. Time and steadiness are the currency they recognize, and mine holds value. The pastor gave me a sentence that continues to fit. Forgiveness is not opening the safe. It's not opening a wound. I forgive by refusing bitterness the way a building refuses water. With slope and flashing and paint that sheds weather, the safe stays locked, the door stays open to conversation. Those are not contradictions. They are how a home remains a home. My trade still names the ethic. When a pour sounds wrong, you stop. You brace and add rebar where the drawing assumed good faith. You check load paths before you sign the delivery ticket. The life spec I keep on a card reads like a field note. Facts first, counsel next. No arguments in public, documents over speeches, 90-day rule without exceptions. Witness the handoff. Invest in what outlives mood. It is not romantic, it stands. Grief remains, but it sits where it should, on a chair by the window, watching weather without moving furniture around. I miss the London market we didn't see, the damp smell of bookshops, the clove and orange peel. I am grateful that the longing found a conduit wider than a suitcase. On February 15th, a lab will open boxes with Evelyn's name on the letterhead. In a rehearsal room, latches will click on new cases and a child will hold an instrument without also holding worry. Love routed through infrastructure. That is the shape I can carry. If you are like me, the family's unwritten checkbook, write it down. Update your proxies. Freeze your credit before you need to. Learn to say no in a full sentence and let the silence after it be the whole paragraph. If you want to be remembered for anything other than solvency, give your time where you are not being harvested and your money where it becomes tools in other people's hands. To Olivia, I hold one stance, and I hold it without heat. The door stays open to conversation. The safe stays locked. Therapy is underway because terms were clear. I wish her adulthood that respects borders. I will not carry those borders for her. If she learns the difference between help and control, we will have a language in common again. To myself, I leave a habit that keeps me honest. Each night I write one line in the ledger. A fact, not a feeling, so sentiment does not edit the record. The practice keeps rescue from slipping in through the hinge. On February 15th, I will light a small candle and keep my remarks very short. Names, numbers, promises kept. There will be no bronze plaque with adjectives, just a sentence about what the money will do and then the work of watching it do it. Morning comes with errands, a walk at dawn under a sky the color of clean steel. Soup started on the stove with onions that argue briefly and then sweeten. A neighbor's snowblower returned with a full tank and a polite note. These ordinary proofs tell me the frame is sound, the cladding tight, the occupancy granted. Bridges do not stand because the steel is thick. They stand because the design is right and someone checked the bolts. My design now reads correctly. Self-respect in the main span, consequences in the trusses, care in the deck where feet actually go. The load is what it is, the path across holds. I close the ledger, touch Evelyn's photo, and turn off the lamp. Money was lost. Dignity, boundaries, and purpose came back at full value. The room goes dark on schedule. The house and the man inside it are built to spec. In the quiet after a storm, what remains says more than what was lost. Sometimes the cost of peace is admitting that kindness without boundaries turns into erosion, and that love to endure needs structure. Justice is not a spectacle. It is paperwork, patience, and the courage to say no without rage. Money is only a tool, powerful when routed through purpose, dangerous when used to buy silence. Dignity grows when support becomes stewardship, when help is offered without surrendering the keys to one's life. Forgiveness, too, has an architecture. It refuses bitterness but keeps the locks engaged, so the heart can open without the safe being emptied. In the end, the lesson is simple and demanding. Build before the weather changes. Put facts before feelings, process before performance, and promises in writing. Choose time and presence over grand gestures. Invest in what outlives emotion, learning, music, craft, the quiet disciplines that give meaning room to breathe. Bridges do not stand because steel is loud. They stand because the design is right, the bolts checked, the loads understood. Life is the same. Draw the line cleanly, hold it kindly, and let what you fund reflect what you believe. Thank you for spending your time here. If a moment in this story resonated, challenged you, or helped name something you felt, share your thoughts below. We read them all, and they help others find their footing. Tell us where you're watching from and what lesson you're taking with you. If you'd like more stories about resilience, boundaries, and second chances, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Until then, take care and keep the design of your life strong, honest, and yours.